Halfway through our Voyage of the Glaciers Alaska cruise, we docked in Skagway, where a landslide blocked our land route to town, so we had a short tender ferry ride to shore. Skagway is the gateway to the Yukon, a boomtown during the Klondike Gold Rush, when 100,000 prospectors dubbed stampeders went north to Alaska in hopes of striking it rich in the gold fields of northwest Canada. The largest gold rush ever, it was hugely popular in 20th century pop culture. From Abbott and Costello to John Wayne and Charlie Chaplin. So we booked a bus tour into the Yukon to find out more about this unique episode in history. Skagway was founded in 1887 by William Moore, a retired steamboat captain, and his son Bernard, because he was certain that gold would be found in the northern Canadian Rockies, and Skagway provided the most direct route. 10 years later, his gamble paid off. Skagway is about 14 miles from the Canadian border and 40 miles from the Yukon Territory. Stampeders starting at Skagway followed the Skagway River up White Pass Trail into the coastal Boundary Mountains. A rugged trail any time of year, stampeders endured immense hardships in their quest for gold. Skagway weather is so harsh, the indigenous Tlingit never settled there. The name comes from an English adaptation of a Tlingit idiom about the north winds coming off the tormented valley that pummel Skagway every winter with hurricane force. Our bus rode along the Klondike Highway, completed in 1979, but stampeders walked, with pack horses if they could afford it, to the Yukon camp at Lake Bennett. Our Canadian border crossing was a mere formality, but stampeders were required to have a year's worth of supplies to enter. This grub stake, between $1,000 to $2,000 US in 1900, was equivalent to $35,000 to $70,000 US today. 5 miles shorter, the Chilkoot Pass Trail is an ancient Tlingit route from the fishing village of Daiya, but stampeders had to climb the 1,500 steps to the summit, carrying their grub stake of supplies on their backs. In the camp at Lake Bennett, stampeders built boats to continue the journey by water. The first 26 miles took them to Carcross, a town that sprung up by a shallow water point used by herds of caribou and other animals. The alpine wilderness is spectacular. Crisscrossed with glacial lakes and dotted with glaciers. The autumnal golds of the aspen contrast beautifully with the deep blue waters. From Carcross, the Yukon winds about 73 miles to Whitehorse, capital of the Yukon Territory and navigable limit of the Yukon for large boats. From Whitehorse, it was another 450 miles to Dawson City and the gold fields of the Klondike River. It was possible to take the rich man's route upstream on the Yukon, 1,500 miles to Dawson from the Bering Sea, but it was much more expensive. The White Pass and Yukon rail line from Skagway to Whitehorse was opened in 1900, though by then the stampede of prospectors was a mere trickle, and the route continued operation until 1982. It was reopened as a heritage railway in 1988 as far as Carcross, and Carnival Cruise Corporation purchased it in 2018. A train tour was an option for us, but a landslide had closed the Carcross section, so it only ran to the Canadian border and back. One big advantage of the bus tour was the number of scenic stops. Dunes of the mist-named Carcross Desert are the dry beds of glacial lakes, too humid to be a true desert. Similar deposits at the bottom of nearby Emerald Lake cause its multi-hued colors. The primary stop on our tour was Wild Adventure Yukon. It included a hearty lunch, and a big highlight was fresh fried donuts, a Klondike Gold Rush staple. Not included and not authentic to the Gold Rush, but still very Canadian, the sweet beaver shot was a good way to spend some extra Canadian currency. The small museum displayed regional wildlife, many of which the stampeders would have encountered. The woolly mammoth, of course, disappeared long before the Gold Rush. Wild Adventure Yukon is a summer training site for sled dogs. An indigenous mode of transport for 1,000 years, it was adopted by explorers, traders, and other newcomers. They also breed and raise puppies, and playing with tourists is part of their training, socializing them with random humans. Stampeders swelled populations wherever they went. Dawson City grew from 500 to about 17,000, with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police keeping order there, at the border, and all along the Yukon. Skagway grew from one log cabin to 20,000, becoming Alaska's largest city. Today, it's only around 1,000 full-time residents. But Alaska and the Yukon were changed forever. The indigenous population plummeted. The Daea Tlingit camp at the Chilkoot Trail was wiped out, and other indigenous peoples along the Yukon and Klondike were forcibly moved into reserves to make way for the newcomers. Of the 100,000 who stampeded to the Klondike, under 40,000 made it to Dawson City. 10,000 claims were recorded by July 1898, but only 4,000 struck gold. Fewer than 500 so-called Klondike kings, including a few queens, hit a major find, but only about 50 died with wealth, including the men credited with starting it all. Tlingit Skookum Jim founded a trust that even today helps indigenous children. Others made fortunes outside of mining. Harriet Pullen arrived in Skagway in 1897 with $7 and made pies to sell. She reinvested her profits in the Pullen House in 1900, and the hotel made her a fortune until her death in 1947. The hotel was abandoned in 1957 and no longer stands. John Griffith Cheney barely survived his trip to the Klondike, but his experiences inspired best-selling stories. Friedrich Trump arrived in 1898 from Bavaria, opening a trailside tent restaurant, later expanding it to a hotel and brothel beside Lake Bennett. He moved to New York City in 1902, where his grandson would later expand the Trump brand. After Skagway, the rest of the cruise had some spectacular scenery, so stay tuned for more of our Alaska adventures.